Welcome to this Explainer. Today, we're diving into something that affects millions of us, yet we almost never talk about the actual mechanics behind it. I'm talking about loneliness. We usually think of loneliness as this quiet, deeply personal ache, right? Just a temporary phase of feeling disconnected. But there's an entirely different, incredibly dark perspective out there. To a global network of highly organized criminal syndicates, your loneliness isn't just an emotion. It's a highly exploitable behavioral vulnerability. It is, quite literally, a multi-billion-dollar financial asset. In a groundbreaking investigation by National Geographic for the series Trafficked, journalist Mariana van Zeller pulled back the curtain on a massive underground industry that does a whole lot more than just steal bank accounts. It systematically harvests human isolation.
Think about the profound simplicity of that sentence from one of the victims interviewed in the investigation, filling that void in my heart. When you really dig into the research, it becomes crystal clear that these criminals aren't just casting a random net, they're intentionally targeting life transitions. They actively look for people navigating profound periods of isolation. We're talking about grieving the death of a spouse or coping with a devastating divorce. They're hunting for exact emotional entry points. And for this victim, having someone constantly reach out with poems and daily messages felt like it was filling a literal void. The criminals know exactly what void they're looking for.
Which really brings us to the core mystery of this explainer. We have to stop and ask ourselves, how did the fundamental, biological human need for connection and affection transform into a multi-billion-dollar weapon? How did international fraud rings take something so incredibly intimate and industrialize it on this terrifying scale?
Okay, let's dive into part 1, Mechanics of the Mirage and Dismantling the Lone Wolf Myth.
For years, the general public assumed that romance scammers were just, lone wolves, isolated con artists sitting at a dark internet cafe somewhere. But when National Geographic traveled to Ghana, which is one of the global epicenters of romance fraud, that myth was completely shattered. These operations are run like highly sophisticated corporate enterprises. At the bottom of the ladder, you have the hunters. These are low-level workers whose entire job is to just cast massive nets across dating platforms to find vulnerable targets. Then you step up to the spoofers. These are tech specialists who manipulate graphics and video to bypass the identity verification tools on those apps. Finally, at the top, you have the finishers. These are high-level operators who step in when serious money is on the line, stepping in to write customized psychological scripts and ultimately close the deal.
So, the crucial question is, how do those finishers actually operate? Well, they rely on something the industry calls formats. Think of a format as a highly optimized, field-tested psychological blueprint. They operate almost like twisted choose-your-own-adventure books designed specifically for emotional manipulation. And get this, these syndicates actually buy and sell these scripts among themselves. The whole goal is to deploy intense, immediate validation. It's a tactic commonly known as love bombing. By overwhelming the target with immediate, unconditional affection, they completely bypass a person's normal defense mechanisms.
And we absolutely can't talk about this industry without mentioning the massive explosion it saw in recent years. The COVID-19 pandemic plunged the entire world into enforced social isolation. Suddenly, these scammers didn't have to spend hours searching for lonely people navigating a divorce or a loss. The entire global population had become isolated at the exact same time. It created a completely limitless target pool, and the industry scaled up instantly to meet it.
Moving on to part 2, the cold math of isolation. Exploring empirical data and behavior. The really scary part is that this journalistic narrative is totally backed up by hard empirical data from federal agencies and behavioral institutes. The Federal Trade Commission reports that romance fraud tops out at over $1 billion in annual reported losses, causing the highest per capita financial damage of literally any consumer scam category. Then you've got a massive behavioral study from the British financial institution Nationwide showing that social isolation directly degrades our cognitive defense mechanisms. But maybe the most chilling piece of data comes from the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center. They found that scammers systematically monitor public social media tags for grief or divorce. They are quite literally selecting their targets based on trackable indicators of life disruption.
Actually, I want to pause on this number for a second. $1.14 billion. That is the annual reported loss, according to the FTC. And remember, that is only what gets reported. Because of the intense shame associated with romance fraud, the actual number is likely much, much higher. This isn't just petty theft, folks. This is the industrialized extraction of wealth, entirely fueled by human loneliness.
Diving back into that nationwide study exposes a massive, systemic vulnerability. Nearly a third, 29% of people experiencing regular loneliness explicitly admit that their emotional state makes them way more willing to trust an absolute stranger on the internet.
Their isolation is acting like a skeleton key, unlocking mental doors that normal caution would otherwise keep firmly shut. And honestly, this next statistic might be the most heartbreaking part of this entire explainer. 17% of socially isolated individuals admitted they would actually continue interacting with a profile even after they noticed massive, undeniable red flags. Just think about what that means. The emotional relief of having someone, anyone, talk to them simply outweighed their logical fear of being defrauded. That is exactly how powerful the desire to alleviate loneliness truly is.
Which brings us to part 3, the neurochemistry of the trap, and exactly why smart people fall for it.
We often hear about these scams, and it's so easy to think, come on, how could anyone fall for that? But the National Geographic investigation introduces us to victims like Susan, a former Air Force intelligence officer and senior bank manager. If someone with high-level security and financial training can lose hundreds of thousands of dollars, we really have to ask, why do incredibly smart people fall for it? Well, research from the National Institutes of Health shows it comes down to pure biology. An isolated brain is literally experiencing chronic social starvation. When a scammer swoops in with intense validation and daily affection, the brain experiences massive spikes of dopamine and oxytocin. This creates what researchers call a dopamine shield. It's a massive chemical rush that completely overrides the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain responsible for risk assessment and logical skepticism.
So the absolute key takeaway here is this. We have to completely destigmatize the victims of these crimes. This is not foolishness. It's not gullibility. The chemical rush physically blinds the brain's logical skepticism. The victim's brain is processing the scammer's manufactured validation as a genuine therapeutic tool to heal their social starvation. It is a biological survival mechanism. And these syndicates know this. They stretch this grooming process out for months, letting the brain chemistry do all the heavy lifting before they ever ask for a single dollar.
So, let's move to part 4, building the firewall and looking at structural defense mechanisms. Knowing all of this, knowing that the enemy is weaponizing our own neurochemistry and building corporate structures just to harvest our need for connection, how do we actually fight back? Well, consumer protection experts recommend building a strict digital firewall. First, if you or a socially isolated loved one are exploring online dating, you've got to establish firm rules right out of the gate. No sending money, no moving off the platform immediately, and absolutely require video verification. Second, if you encounter the grooming tactics we've talked about, report those suspicious profiles directly to the FBI at ic3.gov. And finally, if a scam does unfortunately happen, file a consumer complaint at reportfraud.ftc.gov so authorities can actually track these syndicates down.
Look, loneliness is just part of what makes us human. We all crave connection. But that fundamental need absolutely should not make us targets for an industrialized crime ring. By deploying strong structural and digital boundaries, we can protect our hearts and our life savings from the people who view our isolation as just another business model. So I want to leave you with this final thought. As you navigate the online world, are your digital boundaries truly strong enough to protect your human connection? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Stay safe out there and keep looking out for one another.
Getting to the heart of the matter isn't always easy, but here we always look for the essence. Thank you for your time and your curiosity. Subscribe for more answers, and as always, thanks for watching.